All right. Welcome, everyone, to Navigating Your Plant Design Future. Getting adjusted to my screen. Hop over here and let's start going through this. So today is going to be around unlocking efficiency through strategic road mapping. The purpose of this is to kind of give everyone, maybe you're new at adopting Plant 3D, maybe you've been using it for a while, but to outline the path that we see people take that leads to the most success. I want to do a quick audio check, so let me go ahead and make sure people can hear me. And I'll put something in the chat real quick. Can everyone hear? Awesome, very good. Thank you for that. So let's get going on what should we know about plant road mapping. So the first section, we're going to talk about what we do. We have an offering called a plant roadmap workshop, and we're going to start kind of explaining what's going on behind that. So first of all, to look at this, we need to understand kind of like why road mapping is important, what's the function, how do we know if we need it? And so one of the things we hear a lot of times is people don't know what they should be doing next. They know they want to adopt a tool or a new process, or they might have a new team. In some cases, it's like they've got another office that's going to be working on a project with them for the first time. In other examples, maybe they have a new project that's going to land in 2 months, and they know they're not prepared for it. And so we really need, in those scenarios, we can't afford time to kind of figure out solutions or slow roll an implementation. And we really need to get some definition to make sure we actually can be successful once everything starts getting going and the whole team is in the product. We don't want to have, people waiting on configuration issues, or they can't get the drawings out, or they can't hit a milestone review, because that's when it's super impactful. So some symptoms might be of like that there wasn't a roadmap might be, in some cases we've had customers who've used a different product and it didn't go well. So they tried it for 2 months or 3 months and they had to abandon it because it just wasn't successful within their organization. A lot of times what we see is that in some cases it is the product because it just doesn't work. But in other cases, it's that there wasn't enough what we call change management to help people transition from the old way of doing things to the new way of doing things. And in other cases, some symptoms you'll see is like sometimes a company will have 1 or 2 users who it's working well, and they're doing things inside the product, but no one else can do those same types of things. And so needing to be able to share those configurations and work across different users and even multiple offices. Other times you'll see there's projects where you might be running ISOs or trying to get plants and sections out, and all of a sudden there's like you have to back up a week and wait because we got to configure some things. Maybe we have to go retag everything and we can't get the drawings out because not everyone's using the same setup, or we didn't have things configured right by the time it came to release drawings. So those are some of the symptoms that we've seen from different customers and from as we talk to people around of where do we identify some problems that are occurring within companies as they adopt Plant 3D. So let's jump into just first of all figuring out what a roadmap is. So let's think of those scenarios we talked about. And a lot of those scenarios or those symptoms we listed like random actions where every person was kind of trying to do things the way they thought made the most sense, or they might have started it in one office and they're doing things completely differently in a different office. And so what we want to do, though, is we want to kind of start from our beginning. What are we currently doing now? We want to identify the list of steps that will get us to the point where we want to be. And we can't say things like, it's not fair to say things like, oh, well, I just want to use Plant 3D successfully, right? Because that's too broad and too generic. So we're going to have to be a little more descriptive around what our goals are exactly. So like, for example, it might be, I want to be able to run ISOs out of a Plant 3D model using my own border and my own text style. And so that having that as a goal means, we need to build a model, build some samples, change the ISO styles so we can use our title blocks. And so those are the types of steps we would build into the roadmap so that everyone is clear on what needs to be done. We understand kind of like where the gaps are. Maybe we don't have our title block, or maybe we need to configure a style, but we don't have the client's title block. And so we can identify what's missing from that once we have the framework of the steps to work against. So those are that's the big picture of what a roadmap is. Let's jump a little bit further, a little bit deeper into it now, step in some and say what should be in a roadmap. And so when we design a roadmap, we do custom roadmaps for companies. But these are the key pieces that we look at doing that. So first of all is the workflow gap analysis. And the reason why this is up front is we want to know, what are you doing now in broad terms? Like, for example, you create a bill of material and it goes over to your purchasing department, or you're running ISOs, or you don't use ISOs. And then what we have to do is figure out, where do you want to go? So maybe we want to have a federated Navisource model and be able to pull everything together. Maybe it's adopting ACC with Plant 3D. Having an idea of where you're at and where you want to go, let's just figure out what are all the pieces that are missing. And so we figure out all those procedures. And then we also look at the standard training offerings. So for example, I forgot to hit that deal. So now we're on the standard training offering. And the reason we offer this is because every company needs to have their users at the same starting point, right? When we see companies where maybe a couple of the users had training and then 4 or 5 others didn't, we see a lot of times those first 2 users are getting hit hard with a lot of questions. Or if the if the users aren't comfortable asking questions, you find out that they needed the training when it comes time to issue the drawings, where you're getting inconsistent outputs. Maybe your lines aren't all tagged. Maybe you try to run a line list and you get a bunch of question marks. And so the standard training helps people cover, have all the same fundamentals and all agreed on kind of the general, this is how the product works. This is how this is how it's used. We're exporting to Excel. We know how to substitute things. We can convert objects. Things like that are covered in the standard training process. And then custom training is targeting more your workflows. So for example, when we look at, where do the ISOs go once you run them? You have a checking process, someone reviews those. You might PDF it and put in a folder. That's an example of we would work with you to develop some custom training. So moving through the product maybe handles 60% of the design process, but then after that, there's 40% of the work left to do, and we want to make sure all that is standardized as well. So that should be part of the roadmap as well, because in the situation where we're starting with not using a product at all, we need to be able to get the full job done and know what are those pieces. Then we'll go through, based on identifying the workflow and the standard training and custom training elements, we'll look and create a configuration roadmap. So in order to get to where you want to be, what are the things that need to be created? What are the requirements for those items? So for example, maybe as part of your design deliverables, you need to create an estimate for your pipelines so that someone can do a takeoff. Or maybe you need an estimate for the amount of insulation that's needed. Understanding that you need a report that shows that is critical to capture up front, because otherwise maybe you don't have things configured or input into the model in the way that you need to show it out in the report. So those are the items that would show up in a configuration roadmap to let you know, hey, let's go ahead and check to see if we can actually get the outputs we need. And then from that, we have a documentation roadmap, which is we have these things configured, but we need to make sure what we're doing is captured and documented so that as users come into the project, or as people switch roles within the project, or as if I need to go back and change something, I know what we did or what we were doing. And so the documentation is often a foundation for training, ad hoc training, but also training maybe like in a year or 2 years down the road, people can go through and understand the why behind what we're doing. And then there always needs to be some room for Q&A. There's always some random questions on any project that comes up that we need to work through and resolve and understand how to take care of some just on the ground type of problems. Let's take a moment. I'm going to pop over and check to see if we have any questions. Any questions about the plant roadmap so far? I'm going to give a even more concrete example after this, but feel free to pop any questions in the attendee chat. So let's take a look at what goes in a very common starter roadmap. And so I'll go ahead and start over here. So the first thing, and this is, we start here because for a lot of companies, we work with companies that have, let's say, between 5 and 10 piping designers. And then that's kind of the team size. They have 1 or 2 admins that are helping them. And so a lot of people don't feel like it's necessary. They kind of want to just jump in and get going on the work, and they don't really feel like a need to plan. And so even for those companies, we still have a light framework that we work with, just so everyone's on the same page about how this process works. So we find by far and away the best thing to start with when you're implementing Plant 3D is to start with some user training. And we put the admins in there and the users. And the main point of this is that everyone, like I mentioned before, we have the same baseline. The administrators know how the product should be functioning, and the users all have the same understanding of what they should be getting out of the product. It really helps to get rid of any misconceptions or false expectations at this stage, so that everyone can kind of see, all right, this is how it works. We know it's customizable. We know we can configure things. We will do that, but at a later point in time. So right now, let's just kind of get everyone in and working on the software. And so that's what we cover in our Plant 3D user training. And we have a variety of flavors around this. Some companies are just adopting P&ID. Some people are adopting just 3D modeling, and so they're just doing pipe routing and some structural steel and some equipment. And others are adopting the whole process. So P&IDs, intelligent P&IDs, and 3D modeling with ISOs and orthos. So we can accommodate all of those. Typically, like our time frame is a day for P&ID training and 2 to 3 days for the 3D modeling, just depending on all the topics that you want included. But that's the foundation that we're going to build so that everyone has the same core understanding, and we can work through kind of getting them up to speed on what they should be expecting out of the product. And next, we'll put in Plant 3D admin training. And so this, again, is just building our foundation. So we know what the product can do, and now we need to make sure that the people who are going to configure it and set it up all have a shared understanding about what they should be doing. So, for example, if we were to lay out a map of all the pipe specs that need to be made, that they might, the admins might look at it and say, okay, so I have a list of pipe specs to make, but where do I go? What do I do? How do I build these? And so those are the types of questions we answer in the Plant 3D admin training. So in reference to specs in particular, our best practice is that we create a blank catalog, usually based on the material type, or sometimes the fitting type. And then we put all of the fittings that go into your specs in that catalog. And what we do is that way we can control the description and the property information from one catalog. And then we can build 3, 5, 10 specs off of that catalog. And then the specs have a description that matches the catalog. And we're not free editing those, but we control the information flow from one place. So that's an example of the topics we would go in depth on the admin training, just so that as an admin, you're not kind of left wondering, where should I start, right? Some things that we see sometimes are people will just jump in and they'll edit the out-of-the-box catalogs, and then when it comes time for the next release, they're like, okay, I have all this junk, but I don't know how to separate what I did from what the product is giving us. And so, those are the types of topics we can kind of steer you ahead of time so that you're not discovering in a year or 2 years, oops, I got to go back and redo a bunch of work. So we hit that pretty hard. Usually our first day of admin training is around project setup and configuration. Plant 3D is very special with how it uses database and classes and properties. And so we go through some in-depth stuff on that. Day 2 is usually catalogs and specs with some project folder structural organization. So managing XREFs and things like that. And then day 3 is usually a deep dive on configuring ortho annotations, tagging. We cover a lot of tagging on day one, but on the output side, configuring orthographic drawing settings, configuring isometrics, and configuring reports, all topics that we cover on day 3. We do have a curriculum that we can go through. And for example, let's say you might not necessarily want the whole day. You've been using it for a while, so I don't need all 3 days, but maybe you just want the specs and catalog section. We can definitely portion it out and cover what's needed for that. So jumping on through that, so let's say this company, Academy Process, has started. They've done their user training, they've done their admin training, but now they need to get started on a project. And there's still a pretty big gap between having had training and then getting drawings and models out the door. And so how are we going to close that gap? And so that's where we use a tool called implementation management. And what this lets us do is this lets us work with you over the shoulder in a structured way so that we can solve these problems in a very concrete way. And we'll dive deep into implementation management. Just know that for us, this is where we help you apply what you learned in training and all the questions that you didn't get to ask in training to very focused project specific, or sometimes it's standards specific if you're implementing standards, scenarios and questions. And so we'll walk through this with you. We'll define an agenda up front. It's still very flexible in terms of letting you kind of go through and pick different topics. But this is how we connect between I had training, but I need something more to make sure I can get this project out the door. And so that's what the implementation management does for us. After that, and kind of alongside of that, we also have additional offerings that can help kind of finish out the roadmap, and that's around providing report templates. There are some templates out of the box, but we spent a lot of time developing more kind of what you would expect to see from an industry viewpoint, and also doing things like using the same style across all the reports so that you can configure your fonts and your colors and it all matches across all of the report templates. So we have things like a line list that does some advanced things like showing your drawing to and from, showing equipment to and from. We also have an advanced bill of material so that I can group things by existing or by above ground or below ground. And we also have like a structural bill of material and so on. So those are all things that we can get out of our report templates bundles that we have available. And then also, for example, another thing people need to configure often is isometric styles. We are assuming most companies have someone who can kind of do a title block and change that out, and that's not a big difficulty. We cover the core workflows around that in our admin training. But isometric styles are their own special little beasts, right? And so having someone to kind of step through that in a little more detail, let you turn off individual annotations. One of the first things I always do is take off the NS that's in the size annotations. And so just things like that to help clean it up faster and get you off to the races sooner. And then at that point in time, at the point where a company has gone through the user training, the admin training, we've done implementation management. Sometimes that's a 4 to 8 week time frame. They have a lot of pre-configured project template, report templates, and ISO styles, and they're able to create drawings that show their company logo, show their client logo, and match their title block. At that point, most of the time, we don't hear from people for a long time. We might go for 9 months without hearing. We check in and do checkups and stuff like that, but often they don't need any more assistance for us, except for some random support cases. And so we do have a support cases to help kind of figure out, all right, is this a bug, or maybe there's a thing we forgot in training. So we use the support cases to kind of cover those follow-up questions. And so we can engage around that to make sure that you're not really abandoned at any point moving on once you've done this implementation. So that's the overall structure for our starter roadmap. Let me see if we had any questions pop in the chat. All right. Looks like we have some poll questions. Feel free. And we had a question, can you explain why the admin training doesn't come first? So we have tried this. I've been doing this. I forgot to do introductions. Apologies. My name is David Wolf. I've been doing support training and development for Plant 3D since 2012, maybe 2011. And so we've tested this every which way. We've had some companies insist that they want to do admin training first. We've done user training first. We've done mixed. And what we've seen most of the time is that when we skip the user training first, the admins end up having a lot of the same questions. And so we end up covering modules from the user training in the admin training course. And then the other thing is a lot of times the admins need to have the advantage of hearing what kinds of questions the users have. And so we like kind of knocking all that out first so that they do get to see, everyone gets the same feel for what the product does. They're not coming into the admin training like, I didn't know Plan 3D could export to Excel. And so we have fewer questions and have to spend less time reviewing what can Plant 3D do if we tackle the user training first and the admin training second. That's a great question. Thank you for that. Feel free to put in other questions if you have them as they come up. All right, so let's dive a little bit more into the implementation management. So this is where we're going to jump in, we're going to focus on this for a little bit, just to kind of let you see what goes into this process. So again, kind of refreshing where we were. I went too far ahead. Refreshing where we are. We did the user training, we did the admin training, and we're trying to go live, right? We're in the gap between we got the training, now we need to go live. And so what this looks like is different for most customers. This is not we can do one size fits all, but we do have some general themes that end up coming up. And so here's kind of 5 themes that we've identified as we work with different companies. The first one is that a lot of times we're covering things, or you have questions that came up. We'll see people go through training and then they start kind of kicking the tires on the software in the next week or two. And because they spent some time in the software, they end up uncovering some things that they didn't think to ask during training. And then there's also like every client has their own way of doing things. And so that's where when we go to implement it, we end up finding out, oh, well, they do layers like this, and we were not thinking about that at all. Or they want to see their tagging format like this, and this was one of the things we didn't cover in training. And so those types of questions need a place to kind of stay and live and get answered. And then there's always a situation where you have just learned this, you've just gone through the training, but you feel like you're not quite comfortable with doing this all yourself. Like, you took the training wheels off of me and I'm still wobbling on my bike a little bit, right? And so that's where having the comfort of someone who's done these hundreds of these come alongside you and say, yep, this is good. Yep, let's check this real quick. Or we need to have this conversation with this other group too. That really helps as well. And then anytime we do anything for the first time, I don't care what it is, you've done it at a different company, or this is the first time anyone's used any cloud products, or maybe this is you're transitioning from 2D drawings to 3D. The first time you do anything, it's always harder. And there's always an extra level of discomfort. There's some expectations that weren't set correctly up front. And so there's always a need to go through and kind of provide some extra guidance as we go through and adopt this. And then the other consideration that happens a lot of times is companies are like, this project is starting in 2 weeks and we have to have this all done. Can you help us do this? Because we don't have the bandwidth to cover it all ourselves, in addition to learning software, in addition to organizing the project standards. And so these are the types of things that come up after the training has happened that training can't solve for. And so what we've designed is what we call implementation management. And the idea is we're going to take and work together in a couple different ways. So first is a project status meeting. Now, we work with customers that are like, look, I don't need a meeting to plan a meeting. And I've heard it, and for a long time, that was kind of my general thought process as well. Is like, why are we talking about meeting to have a meeting? It's really annoying. It's a waste of time. What ends up happening, kind of where I've landed at personally even on this, is that there are so many times when I showed up to a meeting and I needed to change the topic. And I didn't have access to the person because they didn't know that was going to be the topic. So our project status meeting lets us, on a weekly basis, bring a project manager in, and you can say like, hey, I know we were going to work on Plant 3D. but we got some fab drawings to get out using advanced steel. So can I get an advanced steel expert on this call on Thursday? Right. And then that lets our project management team go find the right person so that come Thursday, everyone that's showing up knows what they're going to talk about. They know what software they're going to be working on, and they know what problems they need to solve. And so that's the big advantage of the project status meeting. The other part of this is the other risk that comes up that we don't often talk about is that, and I know you guys are going to be like, okay, yes, that happens. When projects get really busy, what we see is people get too busy to actually do the work and configure this stuff ahead of time. And so what will happen is like you'll be like, can I put this off for 3 or 4 weeks? We got really busy. And then what we tend to see is in 3 or 4 weeks, it's time to get drawings out. And then the list of things that we didn't do over the last 3 or 4 weeks ends up becoming very visible because we can't get the drawings out. And so when we have project status meetings like this might be a chance for maybe the department lead or the director of engineering to sit in and say, my guys need to be in this. So let's prioritize and get the team in here and make sure I have the 2 hours a week or whatever we end up agreeing on set aside so that they are participating in this, and we are kind of biting the bullet ahead of time and knocking out the work before it's going to come and create a pinch point for us. And so that's the purpose of the project status meeting. Office hours and configuration session, honestly, these are very flexible in terms of we could switch this week over week. The hours, if I say 1 office hour and then 3 hours of configuration, we could switch that the next week and it's not a big deal. What we did want to do, though, is we wanted to give you a framework and a way to think about how we can use these hours, because the planning that goes into both of these is very different. For example, if I'm going to do a configuration session, that's like my admin and the subject matter expert that Graitec brings in, working together shoulder to shoulder, and we're solving problems and getting it done, right? And we might need maybe 2 or 3 of those sessions before we have a new workflow set up that the users can learn. So maybe that's 6 hours of work or something. And so that's working very closely together. But anytime we do and I feel very strongly about this, but anytime we do a configuration, let's say it's implementing a new ISO style, we should always, every single time without fail, also train the users how to use that and what they should see and expect differently right after we finish it. And that's what we would do in the office hour session. So for a configuration session, it's very simple planning because it's one person. But for office hours, you might need to block out maybe 5 or 8 people's schedules and coordinate. Maybe we're going to do this as a lunch and learn type thing so that they can just take a break from their work, come see the new ISO style, see what we're changing, say yay or nay, agree with it or whatever, and get feedback. But those are both very important meetings to kind of plan out. And they both have their purpose. But like I mentioned, we're flexible and changing in those week over week based on what the project needs. So that's the structure and how we would work together. And let's talk about, like, as we go to plan for this, what are we going to do? And so usually what we do is we do this in a week by week session, might be 4 weeks, 6 weeks, or so on. Also figuring out how much time do you need. Very commonly, we'll just do 2 hours a week for 4 weeks. If someone's implementing Plant 3D and it's kind of the fundamental workflows, that gets them in a good spot where they're asking some questions, they're getting some things configured, and at the end of the time, they feel very comfortable with the project. And that's kind of our default. But in some cases, if there's busy schedules or if it's an extended kickoff time frame, we might do 8 weeks and then do it every other week. And so we can configure that, we can change the frequency. Or if it's a really intense project and you know that there's a lot of work that you need to offload to us, we might end up doing 4 hours a week. And so maybe 3 hours of that is our guy kind of doing some work on the back end, setting things up, and then 1 hour is reviewing it with you and making sure that it meets what you need. And then we can establish different topics. So common topics are ISO styles, report templates, auditing models, validating what users are doing. And those are all things that can kind of be defined on the fly. We do try to build like a 2 to 3 week schedule, or an agenda, so everyone knows what we need to work through. But we can adjust those through the project status meetings as well. Do we get any questions so far? Let me pop over to check our comments. I don't see any new questions. All right. So we had a question: if our company's workflows are unique, can we just use implementation management instead of the standard training? Secondly, if we use third-party suppliers, can they attend? So first of all, can we use implementation management instead of standard training? We're okay using implementation management if it's a very focused, tight training topic, meaning something like, I want to automate my layer and color settings. So can you train me on that? So we'd be okay using implementation management for that because it's very focused. We can say, yes, that's going to be 2 hours and we'll knock it out on week 2 or something like that. Where it really becomes kind of inappropriate is where we have to get a lot of users up to speed and make sure that they're hands-on and good with the software, or there's just a lot of training to do. And so that's where our curriculum is defined in a huge chunk so we can cover a large amount of the product across, in a relatively short time frame. And so that's where we're recommending to do the user training itself. But definitely for if it's just a one-off topic or something like that, we can use implementation management. And then generally, if you're purchasing the time of training, we have some companies, there are some large companies that only hire ever contractors. And so whoever really is on your team that you need to have attending the training, we're comfortable doing that as well. Great question. All right, let's jump back over. So we kind of deep dived a little bit into implementation management, and I want to kind of, as we wrap this up, flesh out what are some other topics that we might do inside of implementation management. And because it is a flexible kind of a container, it's more a way of how we work together than it is a list of things to accomplish. But we do need a list of things to accomplish. So here's some ideas for things that we do and have done for customers. So our project review is where we would sit and go through your project template. The project template is the most critical thing for any company adopting Plant 3D to nail down. So we review your tag formats. We look at your lead sheets so we know what symbols you're trying to implement and make sure you're following the right standards. We would look at your reports. And the reason we do this up front is because the reports are one of those areas where if you don't have the right properties, you're not getting the right data out. And so that needs to be covered very quickly into the process. And we're also looking at annotation. So how do I put things on drawings that are going to show up also in reports? Obviously title blocks, organizing models. So making sure that some companies organize by area, by like a 3-dimensional box. Some companies order by putting all their services in a single model. Some companies put each line number gets its own model. And so talking through the pluses and minuses of each of those approaches, and also in some cases where we're using ACC, you need to understand other aspects of that. So all of that falls under model organization, as well as we would cover your ISO style. So making sure you can run an ISO, get a decently clean isometric with your company title block, normal annotations that you'd expect to see in a bill of materials as part of the project review process. Other companies they feel like they're good with that. Maybe they have a project template, but they need to do a deep dive on the 3D content. So what we've all heard the saying, garbage in, garbage out. So this is the opportunity to say, are the ways that we create equipment and our catalogs and specs meeting the kinds of output and quality control we need to see? And so this is where one of our team members goes through and covers each of these topics in detail to make sure that you're actually getting out the high quality. So for example, one of the first things I mentioned was, as we're creating catalogs, not using the out-of-the-box catalog to store my company parts, right? Each company should have their own library of parts that they control. They validated the data that's going into those. And so there's no risk that, or there's the acceptable level of risk that you've had your eyeballs on this. And so we have some best practices around all of that. Another option is a hands-on prototype. So we would use this in a situation where you need more, let's say, organizational buy-in and team buy-in on the new product. Because in some cases, it's a really big new thing, maybe going from 2D to 3D. And you want to close the gap from training. You've had the training, but you need kind of like a test project before you go try to issue a real project, right? Like I mentioned, the first time we do anything is always rough. So we'd much rather have a rough hands-on prototype and walk through some of those issues and hit our head on the wall during that space than do it when there's a real project deadline coming out. And so this is where we walk with you side by side. So this is not us doing the work, it's your team doing the work. But every week there's a review of, all right, let's look at the P&IDs you just made. All right, let's look at your 3D model. Did you get everything tagged? Is everything on the right layers? Is everything referencing correctly together? Are you able to create an ortho that shows everything correctly? Walking through the isometrics, walking through your ports and checking the deliverables that come out of this so that at the end of the day, when you hand over a bill of material to your purchasing group, they're not like, what is this? I don't understand any of this. Or so that when you go to run a package to a customer, you're not surprised about what's in it and they're not surprised about it either. So that's a great use case for a hands-on prototype. Another one that's popular for companies to bolt on is using Plant 3D for ACC. So there's, if you've been using Plant 3D for a while, there are a few things that you want to kind of check and make sure you have straightened out before you put this on a project. And so this is us going over with a company that's already familiar with Plant 3D and just going through all the steps that we know that they need to figure out and align around to make sure that they're going to be successful using ACC. And so this is the implementation management we have structured for that. I wanted to cover, as we wrap up, one more example, just kind of give you an idea of a customer story that we encountered recently. So we worked with the customer and they had several team members do P&IDs. And I've heard this, I was at AU this past week. I got to see my friend Jason Hudson, which was a pretty big deal. He's super smart. We've been working on the forums together for a long time, but this was our first chance to meet in person. He mentioned they don't do intelligent P&IDs either because people are running into troubles with it. And so this is not an uncommon thing, but this is some of the things that they ran into. And hopefully that's not oversharing. Apologies if it is, Jason. But in our customers' experience, the P&IDs ended up being complicated to edit, and they were slower. And so they were afraid that if they tried to do intelligent P&IDs, that it just would not work for them. And this is a company that had about 17 people in Plant 3D. Some of them were admins, some users. And they already have a fairly complex environment. They're used to using Plant 3D for piping. And so they're using Navisworks and Revit alongside of it. And so they followed kind of like our basic roadmap of user training and admin training. They also got our report bundle so they could get their line list out and some takeoff lists out very easily. And then they did the hands-on prototype. And so at the end of this, and they can come back and talk to me if I misrepresented this, I apologize, but we did have a project wrap up, and this is the feedback, some of the feedback they gave, but everyone was comfortable. After we went through the hands-on prototype, it really solved a lot of their questions. So their admins had some time to do some configuration. The users had time to create P&IDs, and they got a lot more comfortable because they were able to apply the trainings they had to a real life environment, a real life project. I think in this case it was a live project, and they were able to run the reports that they needed, and they were able to get their line list out. And so that was a big win because it didn't put anything at risk. They had expert level consulting along the way. We were able to stay on schedule. I think the only feedback we got was that they would have liked to have more configuration time up front. But we did it. You know, we created I think on this one, they were just creating 5 P&IDs. They were able to get them out and complete. So they were very excited to be able to go through this process and understand that the P&IDs can work. It was fast. They were able to get it done. And it was a very smooth process for them. So that's on the feedback and some things that you can see when you go through and you have a roadmap engagement where you do define the problem. Go ahead and capture what people are scared about or nervous about, capture where you want to go, and then we can build this pathway together for getting through and implementing Plant 3D. I'm going to pop over and back and see if we have any other questions coming in. I don't think I see any. And we're right about to time. So if there are no other questions, I will do one thing before we jump off. If you could go ahead, I'm going to put a link in the chat, in the attendance chat. One of the things we're doing is let me finish typing before I try to talk. One of the things that we're doing is we're evaluating where we should be investing as a company to help plant designers. And so I put a link in the chat. If you could fill out that survey and let us know what you think is the biggest business problem that Plant 3D or piping designers face, that'd be very helpful. So we want to make sure that when we do go ahead and solve the next problem, that we're not solving some obscure thing that nobody cares about. We're going to solve a big important pain point in a very real way and help the designers out as we try to get these process facilities up and going. So that's all I have for today. Thank you for joining us. We appreciate your time, and hopefully this was informative and gives you an idea of how you can improve your implementation of Plant 3D in the future.